Welcome everybody to Perspective on the Metaverse. This is our first episode fully in English, so it's for a wider audience. Usually we do this in Italian, and we have an audience that is particularly targeted in the country of Italy and a few other places in the world where they speak Italian. But now we open to English, and we have our first exceptional guest. And it's gonna be Filippo, because I'm here always like with Rita and Filippo, that is gonna give us an introduction to our first English-speaking guest. Thank you, Filippo.
Absolutely, Roberto, and thank you very much. We moved to the United States today, and for this first episode in English, and I have the great pleasure of introducing you David Beach, which is a professor at Hammond School of Architecture at Drury University in Springfield, Missouri. Welcome to the first English episode, David.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it very much.
So today with David, which as I said is a professor at the School of Architecture, we're gonna have a panoramic view on how in the United States the metaverse, and specifically in School of Architecture, in this specific field, it's treated. David, since 2013, when I met him, I know he was always involved in tech, and having him today, I mean, with his experience, I think will be a great value for our audience. So David, please, if you want to give us a general view on what is the metaverse for you, and specifically how you bring your view and vision to your students.
Absolutely. So I think the first thing to say about the metaverse for us in terms of how we're handling it in architectural education is understanding the medium of virtual reality as a workspace. And we started working with the Dev Kit 1 from Oculus Rift. And so that was 9 years ago. It was kind of like wearing a cereal box on your head. It was huge. The resolution was very poor, but that gave us an introductory notion of what was to come. And in particular, what we began talking about was the ability to design with scale as a new medium. Typically in architecture, we create a drawing or a computer-generated image of a perspective, and we talked about how that had scale. And what we began to realize is that we were, in essence, lying to ourselves on that. It wasn't scale, it was proportion. Scale is how the body relates to something else. In the case of architecture, how the body relates to a space. And virtual reality, as we began to see it come together, all of a sudden we had a new medium. We had the ability to design with scale how the body relates directly one-to-one to a space. And that's a new mode of work. It's a new mode of evaluation that immediately was very engaging to us. And we knew that the potential to work with this with our students, the potential of that moving into the profession of architecture was very compelling. And so right away, immediately, we began to press forward with it. How do we develop it? How do we make it part of a common workflow? How do we just make it part of what we do as a daily task of design? The initial impact as we began bringing that into studio, that I then, after sort of being able to articulate what was happening, was the way student peer-to-peer review would start to happen. So we would have our students build their spaces, build their designs, and then move through each other's buildings, each other's designs in virtual reality. And typically, and Filippo would know this very well from architecture school, typically when we're doing a peer-to-peer review, students reviewing other students' work, they're excellent at talking about meaning and intent and maybe conceptual strategies. And that's usually where the discussion goes. All of a sudden, the peer-to-peer review became, when I'm in this space, this window is too high. I can't see out of this window. You need to move the window. to these very pragmatic, very practical discussions that were really beautiful things to have, that would be discussions typically reserved to the early learning portions of actually having something built. Those lessons that you learn early on in practice, where you really walk through is what I was imagining and trying to communicate what was actually happening. Those lessons were getting pushed into our third year studio halfway through their design curriculum because they could start moving through those spaces. And so those things, just as a medium, as virtual reality, are really compelling. As we start to look forward towards the metaverse, to where what I'm often calling a Web 3.0, the sort of next evolution of how we become further engaged spatially into the internet, is really interesting from an educational perspective. First, I think the lowest hanging piece for me to dive into is the ability to meet students in the metaverse and review their project, same place, same time, but in virtual reality. And I think that opportunity, it's starting to show up. There are a few pieces of software that are starting to do that. But typically it will be a review. I'm looking at their project in VR. And then they're going back through VR a second time. But that ability to meet up and walk through a project together in VR, in the metaverse, is really exciting. But that leads to, all of this often then leads to, for me, how does this apply to the profession? What is the expansion of the profession of design, and how does that relate to the metaverse? And I think what we've been seeing recently, in the past year or so, is sort of a one-off, like, oh, well, this exists in reality. A retail store exists in reality, and won't it be exciting if we can have that same retail store exist in virtual reality in the metaverse, so we can sell a one-off of a real product in the virtual world. So I can have my Gucci handbag that I have here in the real world and also have it in the virtual world. And that to me is depressing, that there's not a lot of excitement and engagement there. And what we have been seeing is we've been trying to learn how to articulate the designer's role moving forward into the metaverse in something that's truly engaging and new, is the idea of expanding reality. How do we design something? How do we engage the community in terms of expanding the things that we maybe cannot shape in the analog world, the physical world? How can we reshape those in the metaverse? And the first direction that led us is where a lot of my research with myself and my students has been going currently. And that is with this idea of MXR, or medical extended reality. And the quick descriptor of that would be a hospital room is not the most engaging space to be in. And there are reasons for that. It's cost, it's replication. It's the biggest concern is to make that box that you're in as safe as possible. But as a designer, I also believe that we're influenced by the space that we're in. And a typical hospital room is not the best space to be in, especially if I'm there for an extended amount of time. So the idea that it was one of our students brought to me, Ala Al-Radwan, after she graduated as a research project, was what if we expanded a hospital room through virtual reality, and brought the hospital room into the metaverse? And so as we dove into that, I realized there was a whole world developing around this medical extended reality. And so what we've started to do is look specifically at an age group demographic, 8 to 18, that we know might be for different medical reasons, isolated into a hospital room. How can we expand that room? How can we change their space? Almost correcting an ethical wrong that we've done as architects, designing a room that is not particularly engaging, that is sort of the lowest common denominator of housing. And how can we, as a designer, expand that and make it something where, at least for a moment, your brain is convinced that you're out and exploring, and your synapses are firing, and you feel healthy, you feel vibrant, and even if it's just for a moment, and even if it's not as compelling perhaps now as really being able to go out, if you're not medically able to go out, that's something that we can provide as a designer.
That's fantastic.
Is that
I think, David, on that aspect, Rita might have a specific question.
Yeah, sure.
Absolutely. So that's sort of in a nutshell where we've gone.
I actually found myself being hospitalized for a few months in Singapore a few years ago, and I had the opportunity to be hospitalized in a biophilic hospital, so a hospital that incorporates elements of nature within the hospital. So, you know, like multisensory experiences, views of nature, light, etc. So I really got into biophilic design since then, because with my experience, I appreciated, how important it is for a patient to be in contact with nature when they are hospitalized. And I was there for 3 months, so I let you imagine that was basically my home. So I found out about the earlier studies in environmental psychology, particularly Ulrich studies from the 80s, that showed that patients who have access to nature, even just nature views, so the view of trees, feel less pain and have a quicker recovery than patients who do not have views of trees outside of their hospital room. So since then, I became passionate and then kind of expert about biophilic design. And during the previous episodes of this perspectives on the metaverse, I tried all I could to understand from our speakers if they included nature in some ways in their perspective of metaverse. So I really want to know from you the same thing. So how are you including nature and the evidence base about the impact of nature in your projects in the metaverse?
Yeah, I've been speaking. I think in the last year I've given 3 talks on what our research about medical extended reality is doing here, and that's my opening slide is my wife and daughter on a nature hike. Because I believe that as well. And I believe, especially in the contrast of the confinement of a hospital, where you're surrounded by technology often, you're surrounded by equipment, and then that connection to nature is often really strained. So that's one of the first things that we always look to bring in, is something that is familiar, which is nature in particular. And I know we're only simulating it. And for right now, the fidelity of the simulation isn't as high as I would like it to be either. But I think the relevance of doing anything that we can to connect somebody back to nature is incredibly important. Because it gives you that sort of sense of wonder and awe that we can't help but have when we look at something, natural patterns, our connection that we have to nature. It's an amazing thing. And what we're trying to do specifically when we build an experience for that is connect an idea of familiar and unfamiliar. So we might be trying to create a sense of nature or a natural setting, but then often we'll put a tweak in there so that as you are exploring, you're seeing something new. Not something jarring, hopefully, but something new to keep you engaged and keep you coming back. So if it's a building that we're trying to do, sort of a history lesson with building, we're trying to put that in context. We're hopefully trying to put that in a natural environment, but then we're sort of breaking the building apart in such a way that then you can explore it and see it through the lens of a design process or a historical evaluation or something like that. If it's more of a gamified experience that we started to drift into now, we're doing nature, but then I've been working with my daughter who loves to draw. So her favorite subject right now is dragons. So, we're exploring nature and then all of a sudden we're interacting with the dragon, right? So we're always trying to bring in those two things to make it familiar, but unfamiliar enough to then also sort of spark your imagination.
It's very, it's very interesting. You want to go ahead, Rita?
No, I was just saying it's pretty exciting, and it's going a bit against what it's giving us a proof that the metaverse is not going to make us, far away and distant from nature. Is actually extending our experience of nature. So, just wanted to say that. Yeah.
Yeah, I was listening from the beginning, and I was thinking to the aspect of proportion that you have when you visit a space in virtual reality compared to a model. And in fact, the work of architects since ever has been drawing that represent reality as much as they can, and then to build small models, because the only way to leave the actual finished product is to make a finished product. There was no other way. You make a model 1-to-1 in proportion, then at that point you actually made the final structure. So it's interesting that this gives a different view for those that build the design, and also for the client potentially that is going to enjoy the space once it's going to be built. And in fact, there is also, I think, in the next future, if not already currently, a different arm of architecture that is not going to design physical places that are going to become physical, but it's going to just design spaces that are not to going physical, only for virtual reality, as you were explaining also before, or the extend a physical space. We heard of people making quite a lot of money, more than the regular, let's say, fresh graduate architect that design something or prepare a model for a studio, and the equivalent peer that actually is designing spaces for virtual reality, for new coming pieces of metaverse, let's say, that are going to be designed. And this goes up to also video games, that multiplayer video games are in a sort of way a metaverse themselves, a piece of virtual world where people can interact with each other, and they contain very detailed structure where people can actually interact with the space. So this is all work done by people that has pretty much studied the logic of how a building has to be, a space has to be. In your view, which is going to be the separation or a common knowledge? I think about studying medicine. We were talking about hospital before. There is a set of years where you study general medicine, and then you choose a specialization, maybe to be a particular kind of doctor with a particular kind of skill set. Is this going to happen worldwide in the study of architecture, engineering as well, where there is a general knowledge and then there is a specialization specific for virtual reality, metaverse, rather than for physical spaces? Or is going to be just a common?
Well, it depends on how the metaverse unfolds. If the metaverse does what I think it's going to do, and we'll come back around. So I've got a freshman study class right now at the university called the Ethics of the Metaverse, and so we've been discussing, where the metaverse is headed. If it does what I think it's capable of doing, building something for the metaverse will be as simple as uploading a YouTube video, right? So we'll be sharing experiences rather than just sharing a two-dimensional video. We'll be sharing an actual experience on a regular basis. And so if that's where the metaverse drifts, that it is just a common thing for us to be able to generate content for, just as common as we might share a Facebook image, that we would actually share the experience of going to the concert or our vacation or the first steps that our child takes or something like that, that we'd be sharing those experiences, then I think it's going to be something that every architect does all the time. I think that there are specifics inside of the industry that will have specialization in, for sure. Digital twins would be one of the first ones. So having a virtual building that is running parallel in real time to a real building, that those two things are happening in sequence, that being able to design how those two things are connected and running in sequence so that the building can be managed better, so that if somebody is like, if I'm teaching a class and for some reason can't make it to class, I could visit the building and visit my students. That's going to take a higher level of specialization than simple communication. So I think we'll have specific engineers, architects, and engineers, by that I mean computer engineers, computer scientists, sort of helping us build those experiences to run them well. And then I think the other side of it is the design side of it. I do think that there will be, in the same way that you might have as an architect or as a designer hiring somebody to help you with your web presence, I think that we will find the necessity of hiring people that have advanced skills in terms of extending our building, extending our spaces, extending our public forums, really important as well. So I think that those will be, it's this building type, like thinking beyond a hospital, if it's a school, or if it's retail, or if it's a public forum space, any of those type of spaces might need a specific type of extended reality for them. So that as the metaverse and as virtual reality becomes more ubiquitous, anybody that's visiting those spaces can then also be visiting the extension of that space as well when they're in those locations.
And one thing, because you made an analogy that really triggered a lot of thinking in my brain, like you said, creating small things in the metaverse will be like uploading a YouTube video, right?
Right.
And the uploading of a YouTube video have discovered a huge quantity of talents in making video that would never been discovered if it wasn't YouTube there. Now, I wonder, it will happen the same thing. So there may be so many talented potential architects that didn't go to university, but they have this capacity that will be found and then brought to the real world, if you want, thanks to their creation in virtual reality in the metaverse, maybe. I mean, the same equivalent effect of the...
The world is big, so there is room for everyone, but we already a lot.
Well, this is exactly why I brought up this freshman course. So this is a course full of 18-year-olds, and the structure for the course that we have university-wide, it's sort of a foundational course. We're really supposed to take high school level writing and research and elevate that to a collegiate level. And so the subject matter is open. So I was taught to teach the class, and I simply said, well, I'm going to teach something about the metaverse, and why not ethics? Because Web 2.0 that we're starting to leave, right? The promise of that was social interaction, and everybody can be an author and everybody can be a publisher. And as we're leaving Web 2.0, we're sort of realizing that ethically speaking, it's become very manipulative and a little bit terrifying in terms of the honesty of the content that's being created. It doesn't live up to the promise a decade ago as Web 2.0 was starting to evolve. So how do we create a better metaverse? But to speak specifically on where the class is ending, as their final is due Monday, December 12th. I should be specific because none of this happens sequentially when people go back and watch. But I just tossed out an idea. Well, we're going to do final VR projects. So these are 18-year-olds from all disciplines. I have 1 or 2 architecture students, and then everything from medical students going into the medical profession to game development to lots of undeclared, we don't know what we want to be. So we're creating these VR projects just to see how far we could get. And so the 3 groups out of the 18 students that we created, the projects that we're wrapping up this week, the first one is a simulation for dementia. So all filmed in first person, and we're creating memory gaps as a story unfolds. So that, first of all, if you have somebody in your life that does have dementia, you can understand their perspective. Or the lead sort of thinker on this was somebody going into the medical profession. Their thought was, I can treat better if I can have more empathy, if I can understand their viewpoint and what they're going through. And so that was, I was, wow, this is an amazing idea that these 18-year-olds have come up with. The next one was, we live in a early 1900s residence hall. We're a little bit intimidated about fire escape from this older building. can we simulate a fire escape? And the things that we've learned from that have been remarkable. And the idea that we could quickly build and customize a simulation in an emergency situation so that it's practiced at a one-to-one kind of scale is pretty incredible. And then the third one that in the States here has become an increasing social issue is they wanted to simulate a traffic stop, a common traffic stop, being pulled over by law enforcement. And it quickly became, well, let's look at it from both perspectives. What it's like to be pulled over during a traffic stop, because that's something, as we discussed, it's never taught in education, in driver's education. It's really never covered. It's just how to drive safe. But that can be sort of a terrifying experience. But then we also flipped it around and have done this from the perception of an officer as well, so that if you're a driver, you can understand a law enforcement officer's perspective as well. And so these are little 4-week projects that we've done, and it speaks to how quickly the technology is evolving for us to be able to build these experiences, to build empathy in the user. And I think that's, in speaking about medical extended reality and speaking about the best potentials of the metaverse, I think it's this empathy building machine that is something that just like in saying proportion and scale for architecture, we haven't been designing with scale, we've been designing with proportion. Mm-hmm. We haven't really been communicating to a high degree with empathy. And I think the higher level thinking, the more thoughtful approach to the metaverse, where its potential is this ability to share this notion of empathy in a really powerful way. And that's where this final assignment has kind of led us in this class. That's one of the things that we hope to achieve as the metaverse starts to unfold.
Thanks, David. I have one last question before we're gonna ask you the final 3 questions we always ask to our guests. But one that I have is it is more a curiosity, university-wise, and in specific the one where you teach. We know for experience that faculty is composed by various interesting, picturesque characters. And so how you manage to explain, because you need to be approved to bring on those type of courses, to everyone the potential of the metaverse. You had to fight, or it was immediately accepted, meaning that everyone understood the potential of this media and of this new world for architects, but not just for architects, as you just explained.
Oh, I think that's part of the beauty of being an academic, right? Is it's always a fight, and it's a beautiful fight, right? And perhaps we should just call it a debate or a discussion, but sometimes it's for sure
it's a fight.
If that didn't exist, I don't think that we would be able to articulate nearly as clearly what the potential is if we didn't have those fights. So I always feel delighted that we have those fights, that we're sort of approaching it in a way where I am not necessarily advocating for the technology, saying, look, this must be done, but I'm bringing the technology to the faculty and trying to have a discussion about it. I know that whether I teach virtual reality in the metaverse, whether I teach it or not, it's coming, right? If I can teach it in such a way that our students engage with the medium of virtual reality in the metaverse with higher level thinking, then I'm really doing my job. But I don't get to that higher level thinking quickly if I don't have those discussions, debates, arguments, and fights. I think the next thing that we're dealing with that we've really started to discuss as a faculty is artificial intelligence in design. And I don't think that AI and metaverse are separated. There are so many things that we need to build. There are so many things, like if we talk about nature in virtual reality, there are so many things that we need to be able to build in the metaverse that I don't think we can get there without an AI helping us.
Yes.
so the necessity of those two really playing together and playing hand to hand is important. But I think just the last 18 months, the explosion that we've seen of AI art has created this incredible conversation that we've been having as a faculty: debate, arguments, fights. How do we bring that in as a mode of design thinking as well? So all of those things I think are connected, and we're seeing all of them come together. And I think if we don't have the fights, if we don't have the debates, we don't have those discussions, should we be going here? Should we is teaching the metaverse in a way, are we condoning separation from reality by doing that? By teaching artificial intelligence as a design tool, are we condoning changing, altering our paths as designers? All of those things I think are really connected conversations. And if we don't have those, we can't articulate sort of ethically what we need to do the right thing. So it's always a welcome debate, I think. If we don't do it, if we're afraid of having those conversations, then I don't think we can be leaders as academics. I think we simply will follow the technology that evolves ahead of us, rather than trying to lead where it's going. So we fight, it's good fights. And then we hopefully roll those things out to our students in a way that as they leave a program like ours, they're going out and being leaders with how they employ the technology in their careers, in their professions.
Thanks, David. Perfect. I love those type of fights.
Thank you very much. Right now, to close, we have 3 questions. Need to be answered in a very briefly form, like one word,
Sure.
one small sentence.
Oh, but ask an academic a question, Roberto. I mean,
Oh, that's I know. I mean, like I played the lotto
tough.
yesterday, so I have a better chance to win that one.
You have
I
to
guess.
produce an effort.
But anyway, let's try to do our best. Anyway,
Yes.
okay, that's the first time we asked this question in English. So I don't know. I will say Filippo can go first, and then Rita, and I will be the
Sure.
last, and then I close. Filippo.
Okay, very short. So David, for you, the metaverse is?
The metaverse is the replacement of our key senses into an expanded reality. And so I don't think we hit the metaverse until we are overriding sight and sound, which we can currently do, but also touch, I think, is the next key one. I think smell and taste perhaps come after, but I think touch is so relevant to what we do for the metaverse to really become a thing. So to me, the metaverse really is replacing, overriding all of those major senses.
Thanks.
Thank you, David. Your future perspective of the metaverse.
It's an empathy building machine to me. I think that's a really powerful statement that one of my friends, Dr. Brennan Spiegel, in Medical Reality talks about, is its ability to convey emotion and experience in a way that we currently don't have access to, that we can see on the horizon and see it coming. That's a really exciting thing to be able to do.
All right. My last question is very simple, but you can add comma but and add a little bit of your perspective or explanation. Metaverse yes or metaverse no?
Well, metaverse yes. It is happening whether we want to acknowledge it or not. I think it's still a ways off for at least how I envision the metaverse, because I think it goes beyond something that's a game. I think it is something, it needs to be ubiquitous. It needs to be accessible, as accessible as the internet is now, and hopefully more equal in terms of how it spreads. But yeah, I think the metaverse is an inevitable thing. I don't know what we'll call it. I don't know if we'll call it the metaverse. It might just be what it is, but metaverse, yes.
The metaverse, okay. Yeah, and in fact,
Thanks.
you have no idea how many people were so scared. They're so scared that the first comment we got in Facebook from a lot of audience were very antagonistic, like, oh, keep your this is the thing of the devil. And I said, well, our take is more like, okay, it's going to happen, you like it or not, exactly what you said. So better let's discuss about it, let's understand it, and let's at least have a knowledgeable opinion about it, and not just being scared of the new technology. There are a lot of good things that can happen, and why not? It's been a pleasure. Sorry, go ahead.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the time and the opportunity to talk about our views.
It was great having you, David. Your contribution is really important, and we are looking forward to see what it generates on our next guest. So thanks a lot.
Absolutely. Thank you all. I appreciate it.
And for everybody else, stay tuned for the next episode in English that we're gonna do. And for those of you that understand Italian, there are plenty of Italian episodes to watch and listen in our podcast as well. Thank you very much, everybody.